just wanted to give a quick update. It's been a couple weeks since I did a video and talked about some things. I had a situation where was renting some co-working space. Now, I don't know how the rest of the folks that are doing their own thing or trying to get their own business or do other things that work from home. I don't do very well at it. I find it very difficult to work from my home. So I need a co-working space. I need a space that separates the work and the home. And I had this co-working space that I had been doing, which was very nice. Everything was great. But one day I got an email and saying, hey, we're closing in a couple days and we're moving. So where they moved to was a little out of the way for me. So I had to find a new place and I had to make some adjustments. I had to buy some lights and some other things that the place I was at was gracious enough to let me use to record these videos. But we're back on track, and I just want to give an update. For the podcast, I just recorded a great interview with a woman by the name of Angela Howell. Angela's had many interesting things happen in her life. You know, when you see a story or you watch a movie and there's usually 3 acts, and the second act is when the hero or the protagonist has trouble or difficulties that they have to overcome. Well, Angela has had many, many second acts, more than most people for one lifetime, and she's overcome them. And she's the author of the book Finding the Gift, which is a phenomenal book. She took 8 years writing this book. And we talk about it in the podcast, why it took so long and everything. But it's a phenomenal book. It's a daily meditation, a daily inspirational book. And you can either read the thing from beginning to end, or you can just pick a spot in the book and you can find some meditations or some inspirations. Great book. And it was a great talk. I could do an entire series with Angela. She's had so many interesting things happen in her life. Good and bad, good and bad. But we did the interview today. It's going to be out next week. It's going to be great. And I also want to make a quick note that the Patreon page is still going. So if you enjoy these videos, if you enjoy the podcast, please go to our Patreon page and become a member of our community and help support the podcast. Podcasts aren't free. When you listen to them, they're free, but producing them and creating them are not free. And I wanted to say something too. I just got a new piece of equipment for the podcast, which is an Zoom H5N. And these Zoom recorders, I've used them when I worked in the local Phoenix film community, and they're phenomenal recorders. They're extremely well made. This is the H5N. There's an H6N, which is the latest and greatest, but even if you get the H1, it's still a great recorder. They've just made improvements along the way. Extremely well built, and it should help dramatically with the sound. You know, when you start with these things, podcasts especially, because there's no money in it. Unless you get sponsors or you have a Patreon page and you have your listeners help support the podcast, there's $0 in it. You do it because you love it. So you start with nothing. So if it was free, it was for me. So I had some hard lessons in some of the early podcasts. The sound was pretty bad. I fixed it as best as I could with the editing software. But, to the previous guest, especially in the early part, I apologize for the sound. Even with this thing, it's even going to get better, especially with the live interviews and everything. It's going to get much, much better. And you learn. And in fact, I used some new software when I recorded the interview with Angela today. It's called Zencaster. I'd been going through Skype and using this software called Avere, which is a Skype recorder, but I've had so many challenges with it. In fact, this was the second interview I did with Angela because the other one just was completely lost. It recorded a little bit, a few minutes, and then stopped. And no indication that it had done that. So I'm done with Skype. I'm done with all the other things related to that. We're moving in new directions, better directions. So the podcast is growing. It's going to be it's going to get even better. And again, if you join the Patreon page and you become a part of our community, I want to do one of these, one show a week. I do 2 a month. It's just because of the costs and the time involved. But I want to do one a week because I love these stories. I mean, I could have talked to Angela for like 5 hours today, but the show is only an hour, and be respectful of their time. So that's where we're at with the podcast. I'm also working on a mini course right now. I'm going to have an online school that's called the Masters of the Mind Institute, and we're in the early stages. And I also want to thank a gentleman by the name of Jeff Long, who has a podcast that I love. He's the Online Course Coach podcast. He's been in the online course business for quite a while, since the very beginning, and he was gracious enough to allow me to become a part of this accelerator group, which is, there's 5 of us plus Jeff, and he has been very helpful in getting things started for the online courses. And I'm doing a mini course. It'll be about 20 minutes. It's a talk I did when I first started doing this a couple years ago, and it was actually a pretty good talk, surprisingly, because I hadn't talked publicly for a while, and I just kind of pieced it together, and it comes out pretty good. And for those that may have heard it, you might remember the story of the pen and the dog. Well, that's a part of it. It'd just be a 20-minute free course, and I'll have it up and available here in a couple weeks, and you can watch it and enjoy it. It's got some good, helpful information. I talk about why. I'm still working with the title. It'd be something like Why Mindfulness, some basic skills to live a happier life, something like that. But it just talks about why you need some type of mindfulness or meditation or contemplative practice in your life. Because our brains are not wired to make you happy. They're not wired to make you happy. We're constantly seeking happiness. Every human being on the planet right now that's conscious and awake is looking for happiness or just peace. But our brains aren't wired for that. We talk about that, and we talk about some 3 simple methods that you can start doing today. So that's where we're at. Again, if you enjoy the podcast, thank you for listening. I love doing it. I really enjoy the interviews. Some of the stuff, the other stuff is not so much fun, but I love doing the interviews. And I hate to, well, I don't want to say I hate, but just to toot my horn a little bit, I'm getting to be a pretty good interview. I've studied how to be a better interview and studied some of the great interviewers throughout the recording history. So I'm getting pretty good at it, and I enjoy it. And thank you for watching, and we're going to have more of these here on a regular basis now that I'm back up and in the game. Thanks for watching. Talk to you soon.